You can come with your lens, but won't leave with the same view. You are now listening to Outside the Frame. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Linnea Bolden, joining you with my one of a kind co host, Treasure Gardner. Say hey, Treasure.
Hey!
Treasure, what are we going to be talking about today?
Today we're going to be getting into men's health, physical, mental, and emotional lenses. I know some of y'all have heard of the sayings, men don't cry.
I typically don't like one. My man better cry, especially when I walk down the aisle. I'm expecting some tears. But you know, they even wrote a song about it. The late James Brown said, "This is a man's world." But what?
It wouldn't be nothing.
Without?
A woman nor a girl.
That's what I'm talking
I
about.
wonder if they need to change that because they need to add some sports in there somewhere because, man, men love their
They
sports.
do. They do love staying active. But why are we talking about all of this? Well, September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month, and we wanted to take this opportunity to reach out to the young men on our campus. We want y'all to know we don't just notice y'all struggles, we see you.
But we won't hold y'all any longer. Are you ready for this?
I am. In fact, I'm going to welcome our first guest, Riley George. Riley is currently pursuing his master's degree in communication, but he's also very involved on our campus as he's an associate pastor with Chi Alpha RSO. Welcome, Riley. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I love being
Awesome.
here.
Yay.
Yeah.
So, over 2,000 years ago, the Roman poet Virgil wrote this saying, "The greatest wealth is health." Riley, do you agree with that? How do you feel about that?
I do. I feel like I would be very curious to hear what if I were to have a conversation with him 2,000 years in the future, what he means by health and what he means by wealth. Because I think in general, health is kind of like it's an ideal, right? It's a standard that we are kind of in relative to. So, for example, say uh, we know our body temperature is supposed to be 98.1 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And so we know we are healthy or we're not healthy in relative to that, relation to that. And so I can say that if I have a fever of 102 degrees, I'm not very healthy. And so I wonder what he would say to that, right? Would he just say, "Oh, I'm not sick, therefore I feel, therefore I'm healthy," you know? So I'm curious to see what he would say. But also wealth is talking about value, right? And what you value, and so that's also a somewhat relative term. And so yeah, I think that's what I'd be curious to know. So.
That's interesting. When you were mentioning, over 2,000 years ago, I was like, yeah, I wonder what would be the definition. Because, over time, society has maneuvered itself. Time after time, definitions have moved, definitions have changed, transformed. So, yeah, I think that's really, really interesting.
I wonder if our friend was on a keto diet, right? Yeah, it's just 2,000 years ago, it's a healthy keto
Right,
diet.
right.
With that, it makes me wonder. Not everyone values health the same way. Not everyone thinks of health the same way. And I wonder you all's perspective. Can you elaborate on the difference between valuing a healthy lifestyle or just the benefits of being healthy?
Yeah, so I think I would want to differentiate between what we're talking about, right? So say we're saying mental health. Well, that's a little bit trickier to kind of put your finger on with certain things, right? Um, but something like say body image, say eating healthy, those along those lines. I feel like there's a pretty clear like biological thing, so we can look and say, okay, for me, it's Dr. Pepper is really bad for me, right? If I know I'm being unhealthy if I start drinking a lot of Dr. Pepper, and my friends can come and say, Riley, you're drinking a lot of Dr. Pepper, you need to stop. But we know that it's bad because it's a lot of sugar, and a lot of sugar is bad for you. But then I think that you go take a step further than that, right? Is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated and say, oh, body image. Well, now you're talking about a completely different thing. You're talking about a standard that's cultural, that's social, and so therefore it may differ depending on where you're at. So, for example, I know in certain cultures, wide hips is seen as an attractive thing because of birthing and stuff along those lines. But particularly here, there were studies shown that thinness is associated with a physical attractiveness and things like that. And so, I think I would make the difference, right? And so, are we talking about healthiness in the way that we're like, okay, we can all look at that and be like, okay, that's healthy, or that's not healthy? Or are we talking about something that takes a step further and says, okay, this is a cultural thing. This is a thing that goes above and beyond just the standard things that we can look at and say, yeah. And so I'd say I see that in the question. Yeah.
Let me just say that was a beautiful answer. Beautiful. Because a lot of times we get the definitions get misconstrued a lot. And it impacts people's mentality and their thought process, and how they make decisions, or what choices do they make pertaining to their appearance, or to the things that they eat, or just who they're around. So that cultural difference is really, really something that I think is really important to kind of know the definition of. So that was really, really good.
Yeah. I think there's power in the question of why. So if we say eating too much sugar is bad for you, it's not healthy for you, well, we can look and say why. Well, your body starts to produce either too much insulin to try to make up for that, and then stops producing insulin, and therefore you have diabetes. And so then you have this cultural increase of diabetes because we have a culture that eats a lot of sugar compared to other places. But then you can say, why, for example, go into like the mental realm thing, why would you say that men not being able to cry is healthy? Well, it's like, well, the why there is a lot more ambiguous, right? It's I'm sure there's a reason people think that, like there's some kind of explanation for why that's become this cultural thing. But when you ask the question of why, it's not necessarily such a clear standard, right? And so then I would go and say, well, maybe it's not the most thing that you need to stick to and say, oh, if I'm a man and I cry, therefore I'm unhealthy, right? And so I think the question of why is very powerful as well.
I would agree with you, the question of why, and that's why I asked this question, the difference between valuing a healthy lifestyle versus valuing the benefits of a healthy lifestyle. I believe that definitely points to why, because if someone values being physically fit because of the way that society looks at them and it would approve of that, then what's the difference between that and someone who genuinely wants to be healthy because they enjoy being healthy? So I'm so glad that you brought upon the question of why. Do y'all have any other thing to add on to that, or how guys may fit into this scenario?
Yeah. I think when you start talking about physically fit, it in appearance, right? It starts to get a little complex because say someone wants to look physically well just for self-esteem purposes, right? Like, is there anything inherently wrong with wanting to look a certain way? Well, why? Why is there something inherently wrong with that? However, you can say, well, as a culture, you can start perpetuating this mindset that you have to look this way in order to have a self-esteem. And so there you go. You're starting to get into like complicated waters, right? In that it's not so clear cut on whether that's true or not. And so, yeah, I would say I just lift up my hands and say, certain point I don't know. I think it's kind of relative to the person's, because I know some people who we call them big boys, right? But they're really, really healthy. Actually, they're some of the most healthy eating people. They exercise more than anyone I know. However, they're big guys. They're never gonna have that lean, muscular look to them. And so I think that's where the relative thing kind of comes in. So.
I truly value your perspective. And on this physical health is wealth topic, I have one last question. Is there a particular way that society expects young men to look? And if so, if you see that, do you have any advice for the young men to take better care of their health while overcoming that perception that society has over them?
Yeah, I would say I think differs culturally. So, for example, in the South, in southern Louisiana, in communication, you have these two groups. You call them the in groups and then the out groups, right? The in group is the group that you consider yourself to be in, right, or that they socially accept you. So, say in southern Louisiana, I think that it's a lot more socially, culturally acceptable to be a large guy. I don't think that everyone has that point of view. I think someone can be like, "Oh yeah, you're a big boy," and even sometimes they celebrate it, right? Yeah, I'm one of them, you know. You hear giant teddy bear, right? That's a big thing in our culture. However, I think some places say when you and I don't know if this is like empirically true or if it's been studied, but say for example you go to somewhere like Los Angeles, right, where there's like visual visual things are very important, right? And so and maintaining a face, and so I really think it depends on where you're at. So.
Thank you, Riley, for your input on physical health. And the interesting thing about humans is we exist in not just one state. We have the physical, but we also have the mental. And I don't think we can talk about physical health without talking about the mental aspect. So, Treasure, I'm going to shift it over to you so we can get into this mental topic.
Yes, yes. So, one of the first questions that I have is how would you describe the way a man thinks in relationships, processing, work ethic, motivation?
Yeah, I don't think every man's the same. So you talk even something like introverts, extroverts, those kinds of things. Those are all stuff that makes people different, and where they get their energy, stuff like that. So, but if I were to pick apart some things that I think most men have, I think most men have a strange desire to serve, in various ways, and this could be directed at different things. So it could even be say directed towards themselves. But I think in a strange way, I think men want to protect, either protect themselves or protect other people, or protect women or protect other people. And that's a form of serving, right, in which you lift someone up to and value them above yourselves. And so there's that value word again. So I think that's one thing that if I could pick it apart, I think most men are like that. I think men want to be known in some way, and this kind of comes through community and through relationships. And so if I were to pick two to be succinct and brief, I think those would be two that I can think of right now. But yeah.
Serving, protecting, and being known.
And being known.
Wow.
If I may, the serving part, it really is interesting because, as an evolving race, our general society, men and women have this feeling, or we've had these innate obligations to serve, or things like that. Way back in time, we. The men, served as in protecting, and then the women, we helped out with certain needs, at home and things like that. So I definitely agree with that. I have another question. In your perspective, what are the strengths of a man's mentality?
The strengths of a man's mentality? Yeah, I think that there's a stability, I think, and health of a man's mentality, right? When they not necessarily strength in the sense that every man needs to have to be this macho warrior of a human being. I don't think that's what I necessarily mean by strength. I think sometimes strength looks like having the ability to overcome biases in order to ask for help for certain people sometimes, right? So, like, I think when I say strength, I don't mean it to have this very narrow view of what strength means. But I think that whenever a man is healthy in his mindset, and in relation to what a healthy mindset should look like, that it does bring stability to an environment. It does bring stability in relationships. It brings stability into even something like economics, right? In a family. And so I think stability would probably be the one that I think I would kind of point to. Yeah.
I can definitely see that. And I love how you brought up in a healthy way, because masculinity is not an issue, but there's a healthy way to be a masculine man, and then there are also unhealthy things that have come out of masculinity, and which has started a lot of movements and things, and why women may feel the way that they feel towards men. And I think it might help if we understand, Treasure, you touched on it a bit earlier, women, we both serve and nurture, but we do it in different ways. And I think if we could all understand that, just because we have different perspectives or we operate in different ways, it does not cancel out our value. It enhances our value. In fact, we have the same value, but the way that we go about things may be differently. And it doesn't mean that just because we are on this side, we have to create these boxes in our mind to limit ourselves on what we're able to do as well. And I have a question. Do you have any reasons or why you might believe it's important to acknowledge that we operate differently, but we also have the same value?
Yeah. So the complementary roles of genders is also a very complicated subject, right? So going into this, you have to think about perceptions, different cultures. So me and Linnea, actually, the other day we in a communication class, well, two different communication classes, they both showed the same picture, where it was on one side you had a woman that's clearly like Muslim, right, has the garb, right, and then on the other side you have a girl in like a bikini, and it's a cartoon depiction, and then the Muslim girl, she says something like, "Wow, what a male-dominated society that she feels like she has to dress this way to please men," and then the bikini clad girl says, "Hey, what a male-dominated society that she feels like she has to dress this way and she's being dominated by men." And so I just found that was so profound. I was like, wow, there's very much differences, right, and opinions of gender norms and what makes them different. I would say that even in societies where there's, say, like high context communication, whenever there's very collective view of things, like a Middle Eastern culture, there's a similar idea of value dependent upon the way that it affects somebody and the way that it influences their life. So say, for example, I'm a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. So Jesus of Nazareth, I did a teaching on divorce. But if you know the story behind the teaching on divorce, basically what was happening was men at the time were divorcing their wives for any reason they wanted to, and the woman had no say in it. Well, in this day and age, and I guess even in some cultures today, women didn't necessarily have the ability to have jobs in the same way. And so if a man divorces her and another man doesn't want to marry her, and so she's out on her own, and she's not in a good place, right? So Jesus determined that the woman was valuable enough in their day and age that he was going to make a teaching saying, hey, don't do something that hurts her. And that's what his whole teaching about divorce is about. And so you see that there, the value is the same, right? Even in our culture, the value is the same. But we're worried about how it affects people, how it influences people, what it actually does to people, right? It's the same, just it looks different in our culture. And so that's, I guess, how I would answer that, you know.
You're going. You're speaking facts on us today. Wow. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
What are some of the pressures that men face in society from your perspective now?
Yeah.
And how would you encourage young men to protect their mentality?
Yeah, this is hard because I think this also depends on where you're at. So, say I'm in southern Louisiana, where there is a lot of mindset of don't cry, you have to have a truck. Like that's at least where I came from. That was the idea, right? You got to have a big truck, and if you don't have a big truck, you're not manly, right? So that was a thing. So I really think it depends on where you're at, where you come from. I think in certain places, people are actually pressured to not do what's considered traditionally masculine, right? So it's like, well, then you have a completely different pressure on you. So you either go in one extreme or the other, right? And there's no solidity in that objective value, and so. Yeah, I think it's another one of the things where it depends on where you're at, but I could say where I'm from, it's actually more of the if you're not overly masculine, then you're not a true man. And I'm just kind of like, nah, I don't want a truck, so I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Riley, for your perspective. You have definitely embodied what we want to accomplish with Outside the Frame, looking at things from different lenses, different cultures. So we appreciate you for being on here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope it's helpful, right? I hope it's helpful for someone. That's, I guess, the idea.
We not only want to talk about the physical or the mental lenses of men's health, we also want to talk about the emotional. So to unpack this conversation, I'm going to invite my friend Marcus Hester to be our next guest. Marcus is a senior. His major is business admin, and he's also the BSU treasurer. Thank you, Marcus, for being here today. Welcome.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Doing good, doing good. So I'm going to say this out loud. I'm going to let it sit. Real men don't cry. How do you feel about that statement?
It's not true.
Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, so that's been something that we've been hearing all our lives, right? But it's been so ingrained in our culture that it's become harmful in a lot of ways, especially, to people who definitely want to continue to spread that misconception that men are just these, bulky creatures who never show emotion, right? I think that's something that I personally definitely want to start to unpack and kind of unravel and just get out of the way, Yeah.
There's some people some men who are developing their emotional awareness that you just talked about, and then there's some who this statement is probably reinforcing for them because they still live based off of that.
Yeah, it's, just to throw this out there, is there any person or any group of people in your life that has given you the space to feel and just be a man?
Yeah, all my friends. Every single one of them. I'm grateful for every single one of them to this day. Like, those people, those are my rocks for real, if anything. Yeah, I love those guys.
Wow.
Every single one of them.
That's so amazing that you have that friend group because that's probably rare for a bunch of guys.
Community.
Yeah, seriously.
They do say, birds of a feather flock together. And so if you are stuck and you don't know how to go beyond that mindset, then of course you're going to attract other people like that.
Right.
But I wonder, what's a way that we can overcome that? What is a way that you would recommend for guys to go outside of that frame of thinking?
Just look deep. First, it doesn't hurt to journal. That's something I picked up about a year ago now. Something I just started doing just to do it, and then I fell in love with it. Just getting those thoughts out on paper. That's one thing. And another thing is, finding those safe spaces to, be with the people that you love and allowing them to let you have those safe spaces within them. Yeah.
Wow, that's something that I feel like a lot of guys need to hear, because you don't really hear that too often, especially since we're down south. So what do you think we as women What do we as women need to do to give you all the space to communicate and express yourself?
That's a really good question. Uh, I think it all just starts with community, if I'm being honest. Everyone just getting with each other and just figuring out and be willing to unpack a lot of the harmful things and the harmful stereotypes that we have about around men's mental health, and getting with each other and just start to build more community. I think that's really where it'll start for real.
I want to double back a little bit because when we think about crying, you mentioned journaling, friends who allow you the space to be. I don't think crying is really the issue.
Mhm.
Crying is an expression of emotional vulnerability, and I think that's what society really has an issue with.
Yeah.
And so, how do we get around that? When did vulnerability become a weakness?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I think it. There's a lot of different answers for it. I think when society was just really starting to establish itself and men were labeled as the providers, the protectors, I think that's when things kind of just got like, oh, well, if they're providers and protectors, they can't be, seen crying, viewing crying as just this, kind of unstable emotion. And men being providers and protectors, you can't be a provider and protector if you're showing unstable emotions, right? I think that's where it kind of got its start, at least in my opinion.
And it reminds me of what you said, Treasure. Like, what can women do in this society? Because it's a difference between society having this stereotype against guys. For guys, you're the provider, you're the protector. You need to be this, what Riley said, a macho man, in order to be a man. But then also, I think it can be easy for women to take those same ideals. And when a man does have emotion and express emotional vulnerability, we may not be there to give them that space. And so I just want to ask, do you, like, for one, women, we also have an accountability to, not for you, not for your healing, not for your growth, because I'm not advocating for anyone to stay in a toxic relationship if your man is not aware of his emotions or does not know how to communicate. But if he is willing, and you direct him to a therapist, to give him that space to continue to express that. And also, men have an accountability as well. So besides journaling, like, is there anything else that you would encourage guys to do to embrace their emotional vulnerability and awareness?
Take a second and cry. Just take a second, breathe, let out any emotions that you're feeling, because at the end of the day, it's okay. Like, everyone's feeling these emotions. Everyone's going through, hard times. Just take a second and feel them out. Let the emotions just rock.
Yeah, just to hone in on your personal experience, have you struggled in seeing emotional vulnerability as a weakness?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was a huge thing when I was growing up, especially in high school.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, it was always hard to just let go and show that emotion. Even when I was playing organized sports and we would lose a really big game, everyone's going around crying, but you got those big tough guys. Oh man, y'all crying? I can't cry. All right, bro. You just do you. I'm be over here sitting over here crying. But yeah, it's definitely been something that I have struggled with when I was younger, for sure.
Thank you, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate your perspective and your willingness to talk about it. I think a lot of guys will be impacted by what you have to say. Is there any final thoughts or any things that you would just like to throw out there pertaining to emotional vulnerability?
Like I said before, just take a second, let them tears flow. It'll be good for you, I promise.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate you. Thank you for being here.
Thank y'all for having me.
For sure.
We have one more guest.
And it is none other than the amazing Dr. Valerie Fields, Vice President for Student Affairs. I mean, Outside the Frame podcast wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for her. Welcome, Dr. Fields. We are eager to hear your perspective. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to congratulate you all on such a great job on today. You have really worked, I would say, outside of the frame to make sure that we have a conversation, especially getting the men on deck to speak about health is wealth, and also men don't cry. So I think that it is a great segue into several things that we are definitely looking at in our society today. One of them is with health is wealth. So a lot of people are now falling more into making sure that they take care of themselves, looking out for themselves. And there were two statements that Riley made that really resonated with me. One of them was about having the big truck. You know, all men have to have a big truck. And so when you think about it and you go to certain events and you look around the parking lot, you can just about tell how many guys are in the room. But what I will say now, women are also purchasing these utility vehicles as well. They're not the big trucks that are standard, but they are utility vehicles, you know, to have some skin in this game. So that's one thing that I thought about that was really, that resonated with me. And the other thing that I would have to say resonated with Marcus was about when he talked about men don't cry and just take a second to just cry. You know, emotions can be impacted in all different ways, but I think that our culture has really placed a lot of people in bad spaces because if a male is seen as someone who cries, then everyone is looking at him a little bit differently. If a female is crying, then they look at us differently. And depending upon what your environment is, when these tears come, there are other, what I would say, spaces that people may put you in, or a box or a frame that they may put you in. So emotions, I think, are just, sometimes they just come out of nowhere, you know, for both male and females, and we're not always able to control those emotions that may be building from just the environment that you might be in. You know, I remember very vividly during Dr. Salisbury's her retirement party, all of a sudden emotions just came and everybody was just shocked because I never cry. You know, and it was just one of those things to where when I thought about how long she had been here and the fact that when I was here before, she was one of the first people that I saw. And then I was going, she's retiring, you know, and that's a lot because there was a lot of history that was moving outside of the gates. So when you think about your mental health, your physical health, and what that looks like, you know, and then you go back to your early beginning of your conversation. It's a man's world, you know. That was something that I said, okay, they really packed this together in a great way. And I think as you went through your conversations, you did a great job unpacking. So I hope that everyone who is listening, they are able to take some portions of this and use it, and then for them to be able to move outside of their frames to actually be aware of the safe spaces that they can have and be able to do exactly as our guest talked about. So thank you so much for this, and I think that we will have some good reviews from our listeners.
Thank you, Dr. Fields. We appreciate you for affirming us, but also those amazing thoughts and commentary that you had, along with you, who is the pioneer of this podcast. I'd also like to thank Meeson Fontaine, who is also a key administrator and puzzle to why we're doing what we're doing. And also I'd like to thank KEDM radio station because they are the ones who is recording all of our equipment, and we appreciate you guys. I'd also like to thank my co-host, Treasure Garner, the amazing, as well as Sade Vance, who is also on the committee for Outside the Frame podcast. And we've learned a lot. We hope you learned a lot. If nothing else, just remember that if you see a man, give him the space to be. And if you are a man, give yourself the space to be, to take care of your health mentally, physically, and emotionally.